guys, welcome back to the anniversary with me, Yinka Bokinni. Now, this is the bite-sized true crime series where I tell you about something on the anniversary of it happening. This week, 5 years ago, something truly horrific took place. Personally, I don't feel like it's conducive to call people evil. I've always kind of teetered on the side of labeling someone evil is taking away their humanity. And I've read a lot about mad versus bad, is there something wrong with someone versus are they just bad? The story that I'm about to tell you about, I think that you could be forgiven for calling this guy the actual devil. On the 17th of June, 2015, at 8:06 p.m, a 21-year-old Dylann Roof entered the Emanuel African Methodist Episcopal Church. He attended the Bible study class. He wasn't a member of the church. The congregation who were there had never seen him before, but when he arrived at their door, not saying anything, they just assumed that he wanted to learn a little bit more about the Bible and scriptures and pray, and they invited him in, handed him some reading material, and got on with their session. There were 12 church members in the church that evening, all attending the Bible study class. That included an 11-year-old girl. Dylann Roof sat with the church members. He listened to them as they discussed and prayed together. Now, the church is actually quite a famous one in Carolina, has a rich history. Martin Luther King Jr. spoke there, and it is a black church. It's a church that has a majority of a black congregation. An hour after he entered, the meeting was wrapping up and the congregation stood up for their final prayer. They each closed their eyes and they didn't see Dylann Roof pull out a gun and open fire. He killed 9 people. At the time, Dylann Roof was a 21-year-old self-radicalized white supremacist. He fired his gun 77 times in that church, and he reloaded 7 times, which is just the most horrific thing for me. Like, everything about this story is really sad and really harrowing and really upsetting. I think there's something about people reloading their weapons. I think one of the first cases that I ever covered on this series was about Alubi's restaurant. The killer there reloaded his weapon as well. It's just the thought of there are people who are not armed, there are people who are completely innocent, and you've gone to where they are at their most vulnerable point, like here at the church. They're learning about God and praying and reading about the Bible. They're at their most vulnerable state and you're shooting at them. And it's not enough to shoot and stop, like you reload 7 times. One of the victims, who was a survivor in the church, she asked him why he was doing it, and he spouted some shit about black people killing white people and taking over. He was saying that black men rape 100 white women a day, and he had like all of these facts in his brain as his motivation, but we'll get into those a little bit later in the video. Basically, Dylann Roof was trying to start a race war. The reason that he picked that particular church, and even a church in general, was because he knew that it would get attention. He even said in his police interview that he didn't want to go and shoot some drug dealers. He didn't want to go and shoot some people who no one would care about. He had to pick good people. After the attack, Roof walked out of the church and disappeared. The police were called by one of the survivors, and you can actually hear that 911 call on a podcast called Court Junkie, and it is really, really difficult to listen to. The area was on high alert. There was an active shooter on the loose, and everyone was just really scared that he was going to strike again. Dylann Roof in the CCTV just seems so calm, cool, and collected. It's really scary to watch. They had CCTV of him leaving the church, and he's walking so slowly that they were able to get stills of his face. But he wasn't known to the FBI. He wasn't on any watch lists. Even though they had a picture of his face that they circulated on the news, they actually didn't know the identity of the shooter. By 6:30 the next morning, Dylann Roof's sister saw her brother's face on the morning news. She called and identified him. So now the police knew exactly who they were looking for. They just needed to find him. He was caught at 11 a.m. the next morning on June 18th. He was arrested over 200 miles away from where the crime took place, and he surrendered actually with no incident, which is super rare in crimes like this. A lot of the time, mass shooters, they either kill themselves on the scene or they go out by suicide by cop. So they engage in gunfire of the police and they get shot. If you want to, you can watch the full 2-hour FBI police interview with Dylann Roof. I've put a link to it in the description box. It is not easy to watch. This guy is laughing. He has no idea how many people he killed. When they ask him how many people he shot, he's like, 5? He even acts out pulling out his gun while the people are praying, but it will give you a more rounded idea of the type of dickhead he is. The gist of his motivation was that he was inspired by the 2012 killing of the teenager Trayvon Martin. In case you've been living in a plastic bag and don't know this story, I'm going to give you a little bit of an overview of it. Trayvon Martin was an unarmed teenager and he was shot by George Zimmerman, who was a man on Neighborhood Watch, because George Zimmerman perceived a threat from the black teenager. Of course, there is so much more to that story, but I don't want to get off of the subject. I kind of want to deal with one racist dickhead at a time, and today we're talking about Dylann Roof. He goes on to say that someone had to do something, the news is biased for black people, that what he did pales in comparison to what the news don't tell you about what black people are doing to white people every single day in America. He talks about white genocide. He talks about being on the side of George Zimmerman and that inspiring him to commit this crime. Red Handed, one of my favourite podcasts, they have an episode on this case, and it's really good if you want a better idea of what Roof's motivations were. They go into all of the white nationalist groups and websites that he had subscribed to. He even wrote a manifesto, which is really cringe. I have put a link to the episode in the description box. The case and the way that it was handled has been something that's been under scrutiny since it first unfolded, especially the difference between the way that Dylann Roof was treated, somebody who was armed and had just murdered 9 people, compared to how police treat black people who are arrested for much less serious crimes. They even gave him a cheeseburger. Dylann Roof said that he almost didn't go through with the killing in the church because the people there were so nice to him, and he said that he had to convince himself to do it, to go through with his plan. He said that he had no choice. But why did he sit with them? I don't understand why he didn't walk in and shoot them. I don't get why he sat with them and listened to them and spent time with them only to kill them after. Like, that to me is maybe the scariest thing about that. So the trial began in late 2016 and Dylann Roof wanted to represent himself. It's quite confusing because he represented himself through the jury selection, and then throughout the trial part of it, his lawyers represented him, but then with the sentencing, he represented himself again. It was really bizarre. There were loads of hearings to determine whether or not he was mentally competent to withstand trial, and also whether he understood what it meant to represent yourself. But it was determined that he was not only fit to stand trial, but he was also fit to represent himself. The Court Junkie podcast episode that I mentioned, that I've definitely linked in the description for you, goes into a lot of detail. He was found guilty of all of the 33 charges against him, including hate crimes, obstruction of religion, murder, and it took 3 hours for a jury to sentence him to death in January 2017. The last couple of headlines about him was that he was assaulted in prison, but he didn't press charges against the guy that attacked him. And then in January of 2020, news came out that he is appealing the death sentence. So I guess we have to wait and see for that one. I want to end this episode by telling you and showing you who the 9 victims of the Charleston church shooting were. Sharonda Coleman Singleton, Cynthia Hurd, Tywanza Sanders, Myra Thompson, Reverend Clementa Pickney, Ethel Lee Lance, Reverend Daniel L. Simmons, Reverend DePayne Middleton Doctor, Susie Jackson. Thank you for watching. That was a tough one.